Good afternoon, everybody. This week, we're going to focus on setting up your rooms and the confrontation itself that will take place in those rooms. So far, we've talked about legal issues, we've talked about types of questions you're going to use in your interviews, which will be your subject interviews for the most part, and we also talked about some body language stuff that we're going to be observing during those initial phases of the interviews. This week, though, we're going to focus on how your room should be set up and the confrontation itself. So the confrontation being that of going from a basic interview to the interrogation, where we are going to shut down those denials that people are going to give us during that confrontation. So some requirements that we have to have in order to be good interrogators is, number one, you're going to have to be a patient person. If you're not patient, you can't listen to people, and you don't have the ability to act upon those different scenarios, you're going to struggle with being an interrogator. People think that being an interrogator is about getting in there and actually pushing people over the line to confess, when in reality that's not the way it works. Being a good interrogator is listening and knowing that when I enter that room, it may be quite a while before I get out of there. I may not get out of that room for a couple of hours. It may be 5 minutes. It could be an entire day that you've planned to be there. The longest one that I ever did was about 18 hours. So an 18-hour interrogation. Now, that took some breaks. People got to get something to eat and things like that. But we spent almost 18 hours talking to an individual. And by the end of it, we got nothing. The guy never said anything new, gave us a little bit of information, but nothing that was really substantial that we could use in the investigation. And that's something that's kind of frustrating with what we do, is that you can talk to somebody all day and they may not tell you anything. And so you have to understand that, sometimes we lose. Sometimes we don't, I don't say lose, but we get caught up in what we're thinking is going to be a case that we can solve, and we can't. And that's okay. You know what? You can't solve them all. And we have to understand that. We have to have that desire to learn human psychology, because it's important to understand the way the mind works, the way the brain works, the body works. And by being in that room, seeing the psychological change in people, that puts us in a position where we understand things like body language and other things we're looking for, like micro expressions. We're looking for nonverbal cues, verbal cues, all the stuff that makes up a good interrogation. We also have to be what's called a convincer. We have to be able to make the sale. And what I tell people is, making the sale is along the lines of this. It's convincing people that prison's okay. I had a mentor one time tell me, he said, "Chris, your job is to sell prison to people." And when he told me that, it made me think for a little while. And I was like, wow, that's a really good analogy, because it's true, right? Like, we bring people in who are scared to death to talk to us, and in reality, we're teaching them that it's okay to tell us the truth, and it's okay to go to prison, or something bad is going to happen to them, because we can't lie to people, right? We can't lie to people when it comes to terms of them being their legal ramifications of what happens. We can't tell them, don't worry, if you tell me, nothing bad's going to happen to you. Well, we know that's not true, because it absolutely could. There are minor things we can lie to people about. You can lie to people about certain things that we do. What we can't do is make false promises to people. And that'd be a false promise, right? If you tell somebody nothing bad's going to happen to them, that's not what we can do. We can't push those issues out there. Those are major legal issues. I'm a firm believer in not using lying, period, in an interview, because, again, we talk about rapport and stuff like that. You talk about destroying rapport. An easy way to do that is to lie to people. I mean, super easy to get caught up in a lie, and then at that point you've lost any rapport that you built. You also have to be mentally prepared. It says desire to catch the bad guys. You have to want to go in there and deal with those situations. That desire to interrogate may not come right away, but as you get in there and you build on it, you start learning how much you enjoy doing it. I remember my very first interrogation. It was over a weed eater, a stolen weed eater. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't get this confession, then I'm going to lose my job and everybody's going to make fun of me and I'm never going to have any respect. And we know that's not true, because we go in there, and I remember I absolutely failed. I think we were in that room for a total of like 8 minutes whenever the guy figured out I had no idea what I was talking about and he walked out. But it made me realize I've got to do more. I've got to be better at this. And so the only way you're really going to get good at these kind of things is doing them. That's it. That's the only way you can get better at interrogations. Speed up years later now, almost 20 years in this line of work, and somebody calls me at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, we've got a guy who's killed 90 people and we need somebody to interview them. I'm like, okay, it totally changed the mindset. Not that I don't get nervous, but the idea of the fear that used to be there of, oh my gosh, what if I fail, has kind of escaped me now, because you know what, all I can do is go in there and give it my best shot, because that's all any of us can do. We go in there, we give it our best abilities, we walk out of there with our head held high saying we tried our best, and you know what, sometimes somebody else goes in 5 minutes behind us and gets the truth out of the person, and that's just part of how this works. Again, it's the psychology, the human psychology behind a lot of this stuff. So you have to have that willingness to talk to people. And on top of that, you have to be willing to interrogate somebody who might not be the true suspect. Sometimes being in a room with somebody who's truthful to you reinforces that truthfulness. There are signs out there, deceptive behavior and indicators out there in more advanced classes that we teach that discuss how some people can reinforce their innocence in an interrogation. So we bring somebody in that we're not 100% positive about at the moment. We interrogate them and we realize, wait, maybe this person is not the guilty party. Maybe I do have an innocent person. So sometimes it helps reinforce that idea. So I tell people when it comes to interrogating people, we're playing chess while they're playing checkers. Some people will say it's a game of chess. It's not. We should be playing an entirely different board game. While they are trying to stay one move ahead of us, they're playing checkers. We're playing chess the whole time. We're playing a completely different game. We are 3 moves ahead of them. We're not allowing them to know where we're going. We're coming from an alternate angle to catch them. Science, a lot of times in law enforcement, bases itself around certain aspects of what we do as true science. You talk about arsons, crime scenes. The way we work a crime scene is one way. It's particular every single time you should work a crime scene with minor variants. But when it comes to actual interrogation, it's an art form. You have to get in there and you have to let it ebb and flow and move around because things change. We can't go in there with this science mindset of I go through these steps and it will work perfectly. That's not the way it works. You've got to go in there with a mindset of I've got to let this interview go the way it needs to go in order to get where I need to get. If I'm going to get the truth out of somebody, I can't force the information out of the person. I have to slow down and take my time and work with the person. Y'all, again, this can take hours upon hours. And one of the biggest things you can do is go observe people who are decent or good at doing interviews and interrogations and observe them and their behaviors in an interview. And you'll realize real quick, every single subject that we talk to has got to be treated different. They can't be all treated the same. It's just not the way it works. All right, so prepping your room. Okay, one of the big things when it comes to rooms, and we've talked about this before in some of the other blocks, is distractions. Distractions are a big issue that we have to deal with. So we don't want distractions, right? We want to steer away from distractions. Main thing is we control our rooms, okay? There's a picture here in front of you. It shows an office space. I'm not a big fan of the rolly chairs for my subjects, but you know what? You go with what you got sometimes. So one thing that I will tell people is if you're going to use a rolly chair, have their rolly chair up against the wall so they can't float around the room. I've observed officers before that are in a room with somebody that it feels like they're chasing each other. It's like a Benny Hill movie where they're bouncing around each other trying to follow each other around the room, when in reality, we need to keep that and maintain that control of that room. Again, like it says, you control the room, you control the speed. If you lose control, your interviewee will gain it. It is a constant mental battle between you and the person you're in there with. They're going to try to stay ahead of you. You're going to try to stay ahead of them. What ground we lose, though, they're going to gain. So what we need is what's called tactical flanking. We need to come at them from a certain angle, knowing that if I go around this one subject, if I'm there about a robbery, but I also know that we had somebody there that was driving the car, maybe I don't go straight and talk about the robbery. Maybe I flank, and maybe I get them to admit that somebody else was driving a car to wherever they were going to go without straight up attacking that idea that it was a robbery. Sometimes we have to think about our course of action before we go there. We don't need to rush into anything. So again, playing with those no distractions, basic colors of the walls. As you can see there's a desk in there because sometimes you may have to do interviews in a desk. There's also a polygraph chair in this room right here. However, hopefully in your rooms, you're not going to be using that chair unless you're actually going to have somebody running a polygraph for you. But if you look at this room, you've got a desk, a chair. That polygraph chair can be used as a basic interview chair if I need it to be. But we use different tools and stuff at our disposal, and so this room is set up for where I can have either an interview or a polygraph done. I don't have any pictures in there. You notice there's nothing on the walls, there's nothing on the table other than there's a mouse pad there for whenever I'm running a test, a polygraph test or something like that. So you don't want any of that stuff. We talked about this earlier in one of the other blocks too, that round versus square table. We want to stick with that square versus, that square or rectangle table is what we're looking for. We want those sharp corners because once we make the turn around those corners to confront somebody, we want to have that openness there. Remove those things like we talked about before. No crutches. We don't want to give anybody any crutch to lean on. No books, no pens in their hands, no hats on their heads, things like that. We want nothing within their reach that can distract them. Nothing that they can piddle with, wash or like tissue paper and stuff. We don't want anything like that on there. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So the 3 steps of an interrogation start with rapport. And rapport is that talking to someone, gaining that basic understanding of them. Y'all, rapport is so simple to engage in. People make it super complicated for some reason, and I don't know why. But rapport is nothing more than just talking to somebody. And the easiest way to get people to talk to you is let them talk about something they want to talk about. Again, just like we talked in the legal stuff, somebody can be under arrest and you can still build rapport with them. You don't have to read them their Miranda rights for rapport. Rapport is only for that stage where you're just trying to get to know somebody a little bit. If they're really into shooting guns, or if they're really into, going out here and riding motorcycles, as long as it's not really pertaining to the case. Now, of course, if they've shot someone, we may not want to spend a lot of time talking to them about guns without reading their Miranda rights. But I can talk to somebody all day about how the Braves are playing, and that has nothing to do with the case, most likely. And that's how we establish rapport. Some people think you have to make this connection where you are both face value to each other when it comes to something. For instance, somebody says, "Oh, you're a Carolina Panthers fan? I am too. Let's talk about them." But that's not how rapport is established. People establish rapport a lot because you just let them talk about themselves. Let them tell you a little bit about them. Hey, what do you like to do for fun? What's your favorite thing to do on a Saturday? Where do you like to go with your family? Things like that. That gives them a chance to talk. Getting in that room and breaking that barrier through rapport is so great because once you feel confident in building rapport with people, the rest of it really comes natural. Because the rapport, breaking that wall that's there between you and the individual, once that wall's down, things become so much easier. And a lot of times people, once you've established that rapport, they're willing to tell you more. But going in there and just breaking down and going, "Hey, you need to tell me why you're here," that's a problem. We don't need to do that. We need to go in there with the mindset of, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to build this working relationship with this person and I'm going to get them to tell me information. So once we get through rapport, we also do the information gathering. Again, this is part of the subject interview part. So rapport and subject and information gathering is more in the subject interview stuff where we're gaining that initial meeting phase. We're gathering some of the information they're telling us. We let them tell their story. Like I said, we've got to let them tell their side of their story first. Y'all, you have to let people lie to you once. You have to. Because if they don't lie to you, then we can't break down that lie. So that first initial conversation, let them tell their story. Let them lie to you all they want. And systematically through the confrontation is when we break down that lie. So we gain that information from them. We gather all that information they're going to give us, and then we use the confrontation to break all those lies and those barriers down. And again, this is something that takes some time that you're going to have to take your time, not be in a rush about. But remember, there's 3 stages to these interrogations: rapport, the information gathering phase, and then the confrontation itself. So we're going to use all available resources that we're available out there. Thank goodness nowadays with social media and stuff, we have better opportunities to do things. We can get online, we can look things up, but that's just makes our job a little bit easier to some degree. Now again, there's some fake information out there online. I think everybody knows that. But we can also use it to our advantage, and there's people that we work with sometimes that can help us where we work. Our agency, the one that I work for, is lucky enough to have some social media analysts that spend a lot of their time. We call them and contact them and say, "Hey, I really need to know a little bit about this subject," and they will spend some time scouring the internet for us. I know some of you may not have that ability to call an analyst up for things like that, but for a serious interview, reaching out to your local departments or other agencies like the SBI who can look up some of this information for you. We have analysts that you can call up and say, "Hey, we've got a homicide and we're wanting to know a little bit more about the individual that is our suspect." You call up the SBI and they can contact their analyst who can find that stuff. Now, you may not get it right away. It's not like you're going to get a 4-page briefing in 30 minutes because they have other cases they're working, but with time you can gather some great information through these social media networks. Things we're looking for are like friendships and pets, some of their dislikes, their trigger words, things we want to stay away from. What if they're a big dog person, then I might want to know that they like dogs. Again, this is about rapport building stuff. If I know they like dogs, I might be able to connect with them on that and talk about, pets and stuff like that. I also want to know who their friends are because I might need that information to help me look up different parts of their lives, not just friendships, family. Do they have kids, moms, dads? Who do they spend a lot of time with? A lot of this stuff can help us in our available resources before the interview we go into, because knowing this information may help us establish certain types of bonds and connections. Those likes and dislikes are extremely important. What do they like to do for fun? What do they not like to do? We want to stay away from some of that stuff too. But then like I said, with trigger words, we want to definitely stay away from stuff that they don't like to talk about at all, because that's not going to help us when it comes to those trigger words. Now, again, trigger words are stuff where like they don't like to talk about the government or things like that. If we're there to talk about non-government issues, I'm not going to bring up the government because I don't want to get them on a tangent, steered down that pathway and never be able to bring them back. So if you don't have analysts available, you may have to do your own digging in some of the areas that we can dig as regular officers through legal means. Again, we can't get on social media and lie about who we are. We have to have these profiles that are legitimate to look people up. And that is something your policy and procedure manuals at your agency should dictate. If they don't, you need to contact supervisors to make sure they're okay with you looking up certain things. But there's social media networks out there that we can look up. We've got criminal histories that we can pull, and we can look at prior calls for service and incident reports from that area to help us dictate a lot of that information that's out there for us. So just because you don't have an analyst doesn't mean you can't do some of your own work for yourself. And there's a lot of opportunities out there for us to pull information from offline or our own resources in the agency to find out more about individuals and who they may be around and who they associate with. We want to learn about what makes people tick. That's pretty much what the use of available resources is all about. We will also learn about, it says learn age different approaches. There's other blocks and stuff that are out there that I teach that talk about generational stuff, where a 65-year-old person that you're going to interview and a 16 to 17-year-old kid, you're not going to be able to use the same approach to them that you would from somebody out age-wise. There's different ages. And so let's talk about that for a minute. So there's a great book out there. There's a book called Seth Stevens' David Witt's Everybody Lies book, and this guy did a really good job of compiling some big data out there about a bunch of different stuff and the way people think and the way they do things. And what you're looking at here is what's called a word cloud, and up at the top it says 19 to 22-year-olds. And this book is really good. If anybody gets a chance to go read it. It's a phenomenal book because it breaks down a lot of what our mindsets are as totality of the people in the United States, what we're all thinking about at certain ages and stuff like that. So at this age, we're looking at some different stuff. I've blacked out a lot of the cuss words there, as you can see, because there seems to be at that age group, seems to be a pretty strong consistency of that when it comes to social media. Because what you're looking at, these word clouds come from social media, hashtags and profiles and things like that. So the little clouds that you're seeing surrounding each other, the smaller the words are, the less they're used in social media. The bigger the word is means that word's used more in social media. So as you can see, 21st and some other words on there are used more than anything else on certain platforms of social media, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all these different platforms that are used out there. So as you can see, these are the things that 19 to 22-year-olds think about a lot of times. So when we're trying to gather information about the person we're going to talk to, if they're between 19 to 22, we may want to consider things like, maybe they're in school, maybe they enjoy drinking, maybe something happened while they were drinking that we need to recognize the fact that maybe alcohol was involved in that situation. Maybe they're still on campus life, they're still living to be that young person. We got to focus on staying in that area. Right? We don't want to talk to them about kids and things like that, about, hey, are you thinking about having kids? Because a 19-year-old to 22-year-old may not have any idea about what they want with their life. And so us trying to focus on rapport building by talking about our kids, that's not going to work. So we need to steer away from that and start talking about things like, hey, I remember being in college. Man, some of the greatest things that happened to me in college was the people I got to hang out with. Friday nights hanging out with friends, Saturday night football games, building those relationships based on what they can connect with and what you can connect with them. So moving forward to 23 to 29-year-olds, we also see the same kind of shifting going on here. We went from college life, now we're looking at weddings and work life, finding jobs, paying bills. Alcohol we still see is a big part of that. It's still one of those things that runs through people's minds a lot. Job interviews, becoming a manager, So we know at this age, a lot of stuff that's starting to play into mind is like life itself is coming into play. Basic life, finding your own place to live, starting your own life, not having this huge push to have a family and all that stuff. You're still looking at starting off small and working bigger. So when we're talking to people, again, establishing those connections with somebody who's around that age, we need to really think about what's important to them. At this age, we're looking at work life, we're looking at paying their bills. Some of the stuff that they could be going through right now. Let's say somebody robbed or stole from a business they worked. Maybe they're just in debt so much because of college life that now they're having to try to find a way to pay for it. And that might be an approach that you use in an interview, is saying something like, hey man, maybe you stole this money because you're in over your head over your college debt. Maybe all that money you put into college and you thought it would pay off at this point, it's not paying off. And this is the only way you knew to pay those bills, because you don't want to come repossess your home that you just bought. So you want to play those cards so that you can help people understand a little bit, or they can understand a little bit more, that you feel for them and they're not just going through the motions just because you're a cop. Because again, we're trying to find that initial connection. And then 30 and above, here's another section. Now, of course, if you get 30 and above, we're not going to go all the way up in the 60s and 70s, but we're looking at 30 and above to a degree, because at this age, we start seeing some shifts. In the bottom left-hand corner, you start seeing religion come into play, because past 30, we start realizing some things like, I'm not going to live forever. Wow, all this life that I thought I have is starting to catch up to me. I'm starting to having to judge different things. And then, you've got family, you've got kids, you got to think about life in this country. Family really starts playing into consciousness of an individual at this point, and so we got to think about that. Are they doing the things that they did because of their family? Same rules apply earlier. A 20-year-old versus a 35-year-old may steal from the same place, but they may have different reasons why they steal. So we got to understand why somebody might be doing that. It's important to know these age groups as we learn more about this, because again, there's a reason why people do stuff. We just got to get to the core reason on why they committed the crime that they did.